Releasing in Australian cinemas on November 14th and with some Q&As over the next couple of weeks is a new documentary called Welcome to Babel. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the director of Welcome to Babel, James Bradley. James, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thanks, Peter. Nice to be here.
Thank you. It's such an interesting documentary about this Chinese artist and his massive mural, etc. How did it all come about?
How did the documentary come about?
Yes.
I met Shen Jaiwei at a screening of a previous documentary of mine called Ochre and Ink, which was about another Chinese artist, Zhou Xiaoping, who worked with Aboriginal artists in Arnhem Land. So I made that film it was released in 2012, and there was a screening at Sydney University, and Jaiwei was there in the audience. I'd never met him, I'd never heard of him before, in fact. But I was introduced to him and he told me how much he liked the film. And then over the next few months, I kept running into him at exhibitions, here and there around Sydney as these things happen. And he kept telling me about this big project he had, this massive project. And it was hard for me to understand because his English isn't perfect. And I didn't know him at that stage. So it was all kind of a bit of a mystery, but he kept telling me about it. And then one day I was Googling him on my iPad and I saw that he'd had a previous documentary made by a filmmaker called Esben Storm, and he'd painted a portrait of him for the Archibald Prize, and it was a finalist. But in the spiel underneath the painting on the Art Gallery of New South Wales website, it said that Esben had made this previous documentary, Goodbye Revolution, and was going to make another documentary about Jaiwei's new project, Tower of Babel. But I knew that Esben had since passed away. So I thought, maybe Jaiwei wants me to make the documentary. So I contacted him and he immediately said, yes, you're the one I've been waiting for. So then we went to meet him. My wife and I, and my wife was Chinese, so we went to meet Jaiwei and his wife, and we got on really well. And that was in 2012. So 12 years later, here's the film.
What an interesting history and process. So tell me about making this film, about the incredible mural that is being produced, and of course the historical perspectives, obviously, of communism in China and escape from there, and his wife, of course, the artist's wife. There's so much going on in this film.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. And over the years, it became apparent that we had to tell these different threads of the story, the biography of their lives, because that explained why he was doing this big mural, which took him literally 5 years, no, 7 years, yeah, 7 years to paint, just to paint. But it was 20 years in the planning. So the biographies of both of them were the motivation for that. And the history of China was interwoven with that. So there's the history of China and of Russian communism as well. And then the painting itself. So we had to interweave these three big strands to tell the story. And I always knew that was going to be a challenge, but it was also going to make for an interesting film. So, I mean, really, it all came together in the editing, as it does with documentaries so often. I mean,
Yes.
I was a documentary editor for 35 years, so I'm well aware of how things are brought together in the editing room.
Absolutely. And we'll come back to that shortly up because I want to talk about the editing. So tell me about finding footage, about production that you had behind you to be able to make the film, that sort of thing.
Okay, well, it started off uh, between from 2012 to 2017. I basically funded it myself and did a lot of the shooting myself, except in 2015, we got a grant from Screen Australia to go to China with Shen Jiawei and Wan Lan and the family, because he had a painting in the Beijing Biennale that year. And also it was Wan Lan's father's 100th birthday that year, and they were having a big family party. So we convinced Screen Australia to give us quite a substantial development grant to go to China and film that. So that then kind of got a foot in the door with, I guess, the government agencies and gave everybody confidence that we could make the film. And of course, at that stage, I was working with my wife, Kathy Lee, who was from Hong Kong and spoke Mandarin as well as Cantonese. So she was part of the project. She was a very important part of the project, especially going on that trip to China. But sadly, she passed away in 2019. But in 2017, Jaiwei decided he was finally actually going to start painting the mural in his old studio, which was just a converted garage at his house in Bundina, because the building of the new studio had been delayed substantially. It took over 4 years to build the new house and studio. So he went ahead, and at that point, Graham Isaac came on board as producer with me, and then he actually funded the shooting for a couple of years after that, until we got another grant, this time from Screen New South Wales, to go to China again in 2018. And eventually we got, the thing is, we couldn't really get production funding until when we knew when he was going to finish this massive painting, because we couldn't, when obviously he had to finish the painting for us to finish the film, really.
Mhm.
And he kept saying, oh, another 5 years, another 6 years, I don't know how long, one day I had to have a chat with him, and I said, Joe, look, we're all getting older, and you're getting older, I'm getting older. You've got to finish the painting, and we've got to finish the film. And actually what happened was, in COVID, he painted, every day, I think, because he normally went to China for 3 months every year, but he couldn't go. So he just painted and painted and painted. And he made huge progress on the painting. So at the beginning of 2023, we applied for funding from Screen Australia and Screen New South Wales, and got the funding to finish it. So eventually we had quite a reasonable budget, but it took a long time to get there, and a lot of putting our hands in our own pockets along the way. But of course, then we also got funding through Documentary Australia, and that's where our executive producer came on board, Andrew Meyer from Melbourne, who's produced a number of feature films, particularly with Robert Connolly, or executive produced them. And he came on as executive producer and helped raise funding through Documentary Australia. So it's like a Christmas pudding, really. All the different bits went in to fund it.
And I must admire you. You've been incredibly patient over the years to film this, and to either to do your own cinematography, or to have a small crew on hand or whatever, because it's not an easy process to take years to make a film like this.
No, it's not, and it has been difficult. But on the other hand, it's been a joy, because every time I go down to Bundina and hang out with Jaiwei in his studio and is with his wife, it's it's a pleasure, actually. I mean, sometimes, of course, shooting is difficult and there are problems, but I always come away feeling elated after the experience. So I've kind of got addicted to it, and now it's over. Well, it's not completely over, because I'm going down to pick him up in about 2 hours and drive to Canberra for the Canberra Q&A session at
Ah.
Dendy, Canberra. So we still see a lot of each other at the moment, and but it, it was a difficult process, but it was also, it just became part of my life, really. I mean, I was obviously doing other things and other work, but I became entrenched in doing this project. I'd wake
Yeah.
up every day thinking about it, and go to bed thinking about it.
Wow, that is incredible. And he and his wife have an incredible story to tell, and the whole history of China and communism, and all that being represented on in this wonderful mural. It is quite amazing.
Yeah, well, he conceived the mural after reading, thousands of books, which you can see stacked on the floor of his old studio, and it became really passionate about it. I mean, he started with the idea, I think, in 2003, so it has been a long time in development. And he, um, the history that they lived is we didn't know at first, but we gradually learned the details of their fascinating stories and the contrast between their stories in that during the Cultural Revolution, Jaiwei actually had quite a good time because he became a painter and traveled around, whereas his wife, Lan Wang, was sent to the Great Northern Wilderness and had to work on a farm for 9 years, laboring because her parents were declared rightists. And so therefore, they were blacklisted really, and she was called a child of the dogs and treated quite badly. So the contrast, it was only over time that we discovered the contrast in their lives during that time. And the fact that they eventually came together was, like a lot of relationships, quite a miracle, really, because they were moving in different circles until she was able to go to university after she was after Mao died and the Cultural Revolution was over.
And they're both, in many respects, so lucky to have left China and to now live in Australia. It's that in itself is an incredible story.
Yeah, it is. And sometimes I feel like maybe we're depicting Australia as such a paradise, because for them it is, and particularly for Lan, living in Bundina is such a relief after her life in China and the pressures there. So for them it is a paradise, although Zhao Wei often only sees it through inside his studio because I mean he passes through it, but she revels in the nature around her. Um, but I mean, when China started opening up, so in 1988, 1989, Deng Xiaoping liberalized things quite a lot, and a lot of Chinese students came to Australia, and a lot of them were artists, and quite a lot of them still live here. And the reason they still live here is because the Tiananmen Square massacre happened, and all of us of our age, I'm sure, will remember Bob Hawke going on TV and shedding tears over footage of the massacre in Tiananmen Square and allowing all Chinese students in Australia at the time to stay here. So Zhao Wei was one of those who was allowed to stay. His wife, though, was in Beijing. She just had their baby daughter, Sydney, like 3 days before the Tiananmen incident. So she was stuck there for another couple of years. Zhao Wei resigned from the party after Tiananmen, but they wouldn't let Lan get a passport in China because they blamed her for her husband's actions. So it took a couple of years for her to get a passport to be allowed to come to Australia. And so and then when she got here, like a lot of I suppose, immigrants or refugees, in fact, I suppose. They started off with nothing when they arrived, and they worked really hard to earn money doing portraits on the street or portraits at Darling Harbour, which Joey did for years. Or as she says, she worked as a cleaner twice a day, morning and night, for years to earn a living. So it's a very typical kind of immigrant slash refugee story in that way.
Yes. I was just wondering, did either of them say that there are some things they didn't want to discuss or have in the film?
Yes, not much. I mean, I have to say it took quite a bit of persuasion with Lan to get her to do her second interview, which is where she revealed some of her deepest stories, I guess, about her family and things she said she hadn't told anybody before, and particularly hadn't told her daughter. So uh, she was worried that people wouldn't believe her when she told some of those things. And I convinced her that people would, she said, people won't believe me. I said, look, and I know at least 90% of the audience will believe you. And she said, well, if only 30% believe me, oh, that's okay. But and then she said, well, if I do this interview and talk about those things, I have to tell the complete truth. So she kind of, um, yeah, she said a lot. And once she started talking, then she couldn't stop. She let it all out. But of course, in editing, we selected which parts of that to use. I guess the main thing that that they wouldn't talk about was the current Chinese government. But otherwise, they were willing to talk about the past. And as Jaiwei says, his painting's all about history.
Mm.
It's not, it stops in 1989. It stops with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Tiananmen incident. That's the end point. So, in some ways, that's the way they deal with potential controversies, I guess. But then,
Yes.
as he also says in the beginning, there's a lot of aspects of Chinese history that the Chinese government wants to control for themselves, and they don't like other people telling it. So,
That
yeah.
is so interesting. What an incredible mural it is. It's absolutely stunning, and yeah, and will be available or is available for everyone to see, and especially through your documentary.
Yes, well, they can see it in the documentary, of course, but they can also go and visit it in Bundina on the first Sunday of every month on the Bundina Main Bar Art Trail. The painting's open to the public. So, including this coming Sunday, Sunday the 3rd of November, it'll
Right.
be open. So, and people have been flocking to it since the film has, screened at Sydney Film Festival. The numbers have been growing every weekend, but he's not the only artist in Dundee. I mean, his wife's studio is open as well, and she does beautiful paintings. And then I think there's about 20 other studios around the town that are open on that day for people to visit. So it's certainly a worthwhile outing on a nice Sunday to go there.
Absolutely. If you're up at Bundina, the Tower of Babel is just wonderful to look at. It's fantastic. So I just want to go back to the editing process, and you've alluded to this a few times. You obviously shot lots and lots of footage and had other footage. Tell me about the process of editing and deciding what stays and what goes.
Well, I had a great editor, Karen Johnson, who I'd worked with before. And I know from my own experience as an editor, the editor comes in fresh to the footage. They don't know really. I mean, it's often best if they don't know anything about the story, really, or very little. And Karen didn't. She didn't know much about communist history or Chinese history either. But she's looking for the story that is going to appeal to people like her, I guess, like the audience who don't know these things. And so we felt we had to explain their backgrounds because their stories are fascinating, and the motivation for each of them. For instance, Jaiwei's, clearly obsessed and passionate about his painting, whereas his wife is actually doesn't like to go in the room with the painting because it brings back bad memories. And I've seen other Chinese people go there and walk in and they can't handle it. They have to go out again. I mean, not many. Most people can, but for some, it's just so heartbreaking. They can't really deal with it. Anyway, so Karen brought a lot of that sensibility to the edit and scenes that I wanted to put in there that I'd assembled before she came because I mean we'd worked on it for so long. I did assemble scenes before she started cutting, but some of those scenes there just wasn't a place for them. But we were editing for 6 months, so it was a long edit, and it needed to be because the other thing was all the interviews, or nearly all the interviews, are in Mandarin, and so I spent 100 days with a translator subtitling all the interviews with her sitting here right next to me, right where I am now. She would have the translations, and I would put the subtitles on the timeline, matching the sound mods on the so that they would be exactly where they belonged, so that then Karen could edit it without herself speaking a word of Chinese. So, and then we, of course, we checked it all at the end, but it was quite a process. So it was hard. But my plan had always been to interweave these different elements of the film, you know, the biographies, the history, and the painting. And we'd actually, you know, struck a few hurdles in that. We'd gone to the ABC early on to try and get a pre-sale, but we couldn't get one. And they would say, well, which one is it? Is it biography? Is it history? Or is it an art film? And I'd say, it's all three. And they go, no, no, you have to decide. You have to decide. It can't be all three. So, you know, there was that attitude that people couldn't see how you could interweave these three elements almost in balance. I think they're in balance throughout the film, but I knew it was possible, but it wasn't easy. So, you know, we just worked through it, starting building it up. Karen got to know the footage and the interviews. And you know, she brought an enormous amount to it because I knew it so well. I needed to hand it over, really, and then come back in, obviously, and respond to what she'd done. So that's how it worked, really. And then once we had a rough cut, we started showing it to Graham Isaac, the producer, and Andy Mai, the executive producer. But we were pretty firm about not showing it to anybody until we had, well, I guess it was a very rough cut, but you know, that that was several months in, I have to say. Yeah.
Okay. And how did they both respond to the film when they saw it?
Well, I have to say that first screening was pretty terrible. None of us were very happy because it was very long. I think maybe it was 3 hours long.
Ah,
So it was long, but it was still very rough. But then the next cut, I mean, this is often the way. They were really keen to see a cut, so we showed them a cut, and it was probably premature, but it also taught, you know, it was a way of me also realizing that, say, there was just way too much history in early on, way too much history that got in the way of the personal story. So we quickly learnt we had to balance things and we had to intercut things so that you could keep an audience going on the journey. And really, we had three chronologies going. We had the chronology of, you know, communist history. We had the chronology of their own lives, and we had the chronology of the painting. And they're all moving forward, but they're jumping back and forth in time constantly from one to the other. But I think we pulled it off. You
hmm.
know, I mean, it was tricky, but I'm pretty happy. And audiences respond really well to it in the screenings we've had, you know, at Sydney Film Festival.
Yep. Which is great. And now there are a number of Q&As leading up to the November 14th cinema release, which is great to see.
Yeah, yeah. So there's one actually in Canberra tomorrow at the Capital Film Festival at the Dendy. So we're driving down there this afternoon, Jaiwai and I and Graham. And then on the 11th, Monday the 11th, oh no, the next one's in Melbourne actually. I don't know. On the 9th, yeah, I've got to keep track of the schedule.
Mm.
We're going down to Melbourne for a Q&A on the 9th at the Cinema Nova. And then on Monday the 11th at the Orpheum, the Hayden Orpheum at Cremorne. And the next day, the 12th at the Dendy Newtown in Sydney. So that's what's lined up at the moment. And so, and it's possible that Lan, Jaiwai's wife, will be at the two Sydney Q&As. She only just got back from China today, I think, or yesterday. So she won't be coming to Canberra, but she might be coming to those. I've yet to convince her to do it, though.
Very good. I hope they all go well. And the cinema release, as I said, on nationally on November 14th, which is great to see. James, great talking to you. I just wanted to ask you if you're working on another film at the moment.
I'm not at the moment. I've got a few ideas, but I'm still working on this, to be honest. I mean, we only just finished a TV version, an international English TV version, which is cut down to an hour
Ah,
um, for a distributor, TVF in the UK. So we only sent that to them last week. So that's I had to recut that. But we also, I mean, we had a German and French TV versions, which have also already been broadcast in Germany, France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland.
mm,
So, this is an ongoing project at the moment. So
yeah.
I've got a few thoughts about the future, but about future projects, but just tossing around a few ideas at the moment. So we'll have to see what happens.
Fair enough. I fully understand that you're traveling and working on the film for various outlets and so on. So that's terrific. James, great talking to you. We've been speaking to James Bradley, the director of Welcome to Babel, having screenings, Q&A screenings in November, and then November 14th, national release in Australia. James, pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks very much.
Okay. Bye bye.